Roll call, please.
Start out with Steve Barlow.
Here.
Greg Gordon.
Here.
Michael George.
Here.
Steve Carter.
Present.
Susie Schneider.
Here. Okay, has everyone looked at the agenda?
Yes, ma'am.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of the minutes from June 10th, regular meeting.
Make a motion to accept the minutes from previous meeting.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Tonight, our first presentation is going to be Katie. So we're going to give you the floor, navigate building solutions. So you're on.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Katie Abels with Navigate Building Solutions. We are an owner's representative firm based out of the St. Louis area. We're really working all over the state now with local governments, municipalities, K through 12, school districts to help them kind of plan and facilitate their design and construction projects. So our company is about 9 years old now, and our focus has been kind of in the municipal market from the day we were formed. Most of our experience coming from facilities like what we're going to look at with you this evening. So thank you for the opportunity to work with you all and present here this evening. So I handed out a copy. I'm just going to kind of walk us through this evening, same as what Steve had included in the board packet that went out earlier. But really our goal for this evening is to review some conceptual options for the construction of a new combined city hall and police department facility for the village of Sunrise Beach. We're going to take a look kind of through your existing facilities. Both the city hall and police department, you're very familiar with what we have here. Also, we'll look at the police department building that the chief operates out of today. We'll talk through how we came up with the program development. So the program is really the types and sizes of each of the individual spaces that come together in the building and kind of how we arrived at a square footage. We'll review some site options, we'll talk about the cost, a schedule, and then Q&A. I will say if you have questions along the way, feel free to just jump in and we'll make this conversational type of discussion. So flipping to the next slide, we did put in here just a brief kind of summary of our scope of work. It really just highlights the process that we went through to pull this concept together. But we came down, we met with Steve and the chief. We toured the existing city hall facility here as well as the police department. We met with staff to assess kind of the current building needs and talk about the budget that we think is available for the project. So the Sunrise Beach provided two potential site locations, one being here at the city hall site, the second being down the road at the Oak Star Bank location. And our goal was to prepare for you some block diagrams that show how these two sites could potentially accommodate a new city hall and police facility. The last thing we did was prepare a cost opinion, and I'll talk a little bit about the total program budget that evaluates all of the required costs for each of these two site locations. If we flip again, the first slide with the photos here shows you the current facility site plan here at City Hall. So as you know, it's a residential structure. It's been converted to a City Hall facility. It's approximately 800 square feet with a basement. There's a public works garage outside, the freestanding garage that they really use for equipment and storage and some touchdown workspace. The next slide shows you just some of the existing facilities photos, and we'll get into more detail kind of on what we learned in those tours as we talk through this. But really, you don't have a separation of public and private spaces in this facility. You're cramped for office space. You have microwave shoved in the corner. I've heard the public restroom is right here in the middle of your meetings. So really just accommodating your functions in a residential structure. The next slide shows you the site plan and a photo of the police department. So again, a small building that was kind of put together for police operations, about 1,200 square feet. There's really limited parking. There's no exterior storage, protection for vehicles, equipment, that type of thing at this location. Again, the next slide are some existing photos of that facility. So there is kind of a lobby when you come into the space before you enter kind of the main portion of the police operations. The bulk of the activity is really just out in the front space when it comes to report writing, touchdown space, any meetings. There are 2 offices off of that main space, and then also an area in towards the back where evidence is stored and processed, with restroom and storage facility in the far rear. All right, so I think the bulk of the time that we spent while we were down here is really talking about the needs assessment. So what we did is, like I said, we walked around these spaces, we talked with Steve and the chief and staff and said, okay, what works about your space or and what doesn't? So sometimes there are things that maybe the facility's not, best suited for your needs, but it's like, hey, I really like that when somebody comes in the door, we have a receptionist that can greet them as a public facing. So we went into pretty in-depth discussions just about the operations, what works, what doesn't. We talked about both needs for today as well as needs for future growth. So that was important. We're just talking about, the number of visitors that were here over the holiday weekend and local businesses booming, potential new businesses coming in. So really, the goal was to accommodate, the city's future, not just where we're at today. From here, we prepared that space program that I mentioned, where we started to allocate square footages to each of the space types. We looked at what we need to kind of gross up those numbers to account for things like mechanical and electrical rooms, circulation, and really built up to an overall facility size. So at a high level, the key takeaways for the city hall, first off, that the board chambers are sometimes too small for public meetings. Steve indicated that sometimes larger meetings have been held off-site because you can't accommodate everyone here in this building. I mentioned the scenario of growth, so the office space is not adequate to support future needs. We talked about the potential for finance, admin, code enforcement, additional kind of public works staff that could potentially be housed in the new facility. We noted that there's no current conference room space kind of outside of this board chamber, so it's difficult to hold small meetings in the offices as they are today. So a lot of that kind of conferencing takes place out here in the public area. And then I mentioned too, the restrooms, break rooms, shared space are all really inadequate and have poor locations and flow. Next slide talks about some of the key takeaways from the police department. So first off, the evidence processing and storage space is really inadequate. There's no pass-through lockers or separation by evidence type, which are important in these types of facilities. There's also an increased need for storage. So right now they're able to kind of accommodate a small amount of these items, but really there's not adequate storage for property, large evidence, even things like their uniforms, ammo and arms, and records. It's very, very cramped quarters where they're at. And I believe, Chief, you said we have a lot of this stuff even stored off-site.
Some of our equipment, yes. I've got a storage trailer that we keep it in.
Again, with the village being in a scenario of growth, the office space is not adequate to support the future needs. We discussed, increased staffing on the police side of things, like a road supervisor, a police clerk. The squad room is undersized. Right now, there's about 2 at best workstations for report writing and kind of day-to-day operations in the building. We discussed that the need could potentially grow to 4 to 6 workstations in that area. We discussed the need for both soft and hard interview rooms. Like I said, there's really 2 offices and a main work area, so no private space for some of those additional kind of conversations and public-facing activities. No vehicle storage or secured parking. And again, kind of commented here, the restrooms, break room, and shared spaces are really inadequate, poor locations. Also noted specific to the police that there is not a shower room or any locker space. So for any of their gear, personal belongings to be held within the facility, that doesn't exist in the current space today. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions before I keep going. Okay. All right, so the next few slides are really gonna walk you through the program development. So what I did in this front part of the presentation is break it down by its space type. So you're gonna see a slide for City Hall, for Public Works, for the Police Department, and then for shared spaces. In the back of the book, there's a total, kind of summary of all of these spaces in one document, if you need to kind of reference that for any reason. But like we mentioned, the current City Hall is about 780 or 800 square feet. When we went through the programming exercise to identify the individual spaces and, the square footage associated with those, we determined a need of about 2,200 square feet, which is a total growth in this type of space of about 1,464 square feet. So the table below shows kind of what we're talking about here. So on the left, we've identified the room area or space type. The first column under square footage is the existing, so we did our best to kind of allocate what you have in existing square footage towards each of these space types. And then showing in the next column the proposed square footage. So Steve and I went back and forth on some of this. I took a first pass at assigning square footage, and he said, well, maybe we can do this a little differently. So I think we've had some good conversation on how to right size each of these spaces. In the comments, I've tried to note where maybe these are potential growth offices or assignments for those future staff that are anticipated. And then all of these total up, and then we applied a 20% gross up to get to the total square footage that I discussed, and that's going to cover the things like the circulations, the thickness of walls, your mechanical, electrical rooms, all of that type of thing. So like I said, the current City Hall square footage would total then about 2,244 square feet based on this programming effort. The next slide is specific to the Public Works portion of the building. So right now, Public Works has space in the basement. About 400 square feet is what we've tallied for that component of the space, with a slight increase in space needs, so total of about 720 for about 320 square feet in growth. So again, they have some existing office space today. The intent is for them to grow potentially from an admin and support side, increase their plan review area. So this comes back to code enforcement, potentially like building inspector type position. That would be a growth opportunity for the city. And then just storage. So there's a lot of plans and permits and paper documents that get accumulated with this type of function. So in total, like I said, about 600 net square feet as the need, grossing it up to about 720 square feet would be their portion of this new facility. All right, the police department currently operates out of about 1,175 square feet. When we go through the spaces we see here below, the need has been identified at about 3,400 square feet. So the biggest increase in space is definitely on the police side of things, with total growth of about 22,057 square feet. Again, you can see here we've identified where they have existing space types today in their facility and where we are proposing the changes be made. So in this case, increase to the police chief's office to be able to accommodate a small meeting table for both kind of internal employee discussions, anything that needs to be held in a private space. We are showing future positions, like I mentioned, for a road supervisor, potential administrative assistant or clerk. Here we're saying that could be shared with City Hall function, and we'll get to that in the next. We talked a lot about the operations. So currently you transfer directly to Camden County, so no space required for any holding or booking or that type of activity. The squad room, increase in spaces to 4 to 6 workstations, evidence processing with pass-through lockers, increasing the amount of space available for the storage items that we've gone through, private restroom with shower, some locker space, the interviewing function, and I think that the biggest change here is really with the sally port. So a sally port would be an enclosed vehicle garage where they would be able to pull in a patrol car, unload evidence, keep it, in a conditioned space. So this is sized for a single vehicle, to be able to pull in with that function. Same sort of math here, we gross up those numbers, and again, we get to a total proposed need for the police department of about 3,430.
I do have a question here.
Yep.
Maybe you can chime in on this. Why would we not have a designated area for training?
For what?
Training.
That would be utilized with the city hall conference room. So if we had in-house training, we would use what you guys would use as the boardroom or the closed session room. It would be a shared space.
Yes, so that's a good segue to the next slide, which is the shared and public space portion of the program. So we did talk about that. Obviously, City Hall will have needs for conference space, public works, police. So in an effort to kind of keep the building at a manageable size and cost, we looked at opportunities where you could potentially share spaces like that. So the council chambers is listed up in the City Hall program. But building-wide, we did assume that there would be some shared components. So you'll see here, the entry vestibule and lobby is assumed to be shared. We said that the police will need a direct access into their portion of the space, but this could be kind of a side door, secure entry point, rather than funneling them through the front door. There will be a need for public restrooms, and then the third line item down is the conference room, which we've sized at 300 square feet, which is approximately 10 occupants with a large table. So that could be closed sessions, work sessions for you all, or to the chief's point, small kind of training sessions could be held in that space.
On the police, did you allocate space to like a secure lobby? So people can just like walk in?
Yeah, so what we talked about, you'll see there is a line item for secure lobby on the police program. We listed it as existing today, but have taken it down to 0 in this new facility. So we haven't, come up with a floor plan or anything, but the thinking is, public will have one access point into the facility, maybe with a receptionist, maybe with a clerk, but there will be someone there that can direct them. So if they need to get to the police portion of the building, it would be a situation where they're either granted access or met by a staff that's in that area.
Essentially, it was you'd come into the main building. Like say, if you were a victim and you wanted to make a complaint, you'd come to the main building. The clerk or whoever was working at that front desk would say, "Okay, let me get an officer for you." The officer would then come out of the back, and we would have secure doors into the police department section that would be accessible by passcode or key card.
I'm thinking more like angry drunk guy shows up at 10 o'clock at night.
So he's not coming in the building. We're going to meet him at the police entrance because there'll be that one secure entrance. That way we're not bringing angry drunk guys through the main part of the building either. We're funneling them straight into the PD side.
I got a question on under the police. What is the squad room used for?
That's their office. That's where all of the work gets done.
For how many guys on duty? I mean, you need 600 feet, 500 feet?
4 to 8 workstations.
We don't have that at police.
Not at the moment, we don't.
Okay.
I think we're looking at this,
Yeah,
not what
20
we
years.
need today, but what we need for
20 years or so.
10 years down the road.
The squad room is used for finishing police reports, making phone calls. So you're gonna need more than one workstation.
Morale welfare.
You have 2 or 3, you have two officers on the street. They both have to come in and write reports and stuff. You're gonna need at least a couple of workstations. But there might be times down the road where we're gonna have more officers on the street, so you're gonna need several workstations.
And different investigations and different stuff they're working on. They all need their own file storage, and it's the way we save space in it is by doing. My vision of saving space is do the L-shaped desk, and that is 2 workstations. Night shifts, say you've got 2 guys that work night shift opposite of each other, they share that workstation. So that workstation is getting used every night, but each officer has their own workspace to store their documents and files.
All right, thank you.
Flip ahead, like I said, I did put in a program summary size, when we total up the square footage of what we've just reviewed. The new facility size is somewhere around the 8,000 square foot mark is what we've kind of rounded to. Actual number, 7,740 square feet. And again, like I said, if you flip behind the tab in this book, all of these programs are in one file, so you can see how those tally. So once,
You mentioned the basement earlier. Is it completely underground or is it open on the back on one side so that you can kind of, when Sally Port just came up, it seems like we shortchanged it. We've just been able to get one in there. I didn't know. if
yeah,
we
no, I
were
think,
using it. I don't know. I know we're way out
sure,
front.
no,
but-
that's okay. So question number one, we aren't planning a basement in the new facility. So I think that comes down to really the cost, which we can touch on here in a minute, just about some of the site constraints. It's something we could certainly, look at doing if that's important. And the Sally Port could definitely be scaled up. So if you decide we need 2 vehicles, we need a van, we can look at, any sort of square footage needed based on what you tell me, needs to go into that space.
Or a
Design
pass-through,
phase, right?
or a pass-through. You have a garage door on each side, you pull in, one side it's down, it's secured, you do your thing, the other side opens, you pull out, there's somebody waiting behind you.
And I mean, my
That's very
biggest,
common.
Got it. Okay.
and my biggest thing on that, initially it wasn't on my radar, but Steve brought up some real good points with it, is right now, if we have a car that we believe is drugs in it, we need to secure that car. We don't have anywhere to secure that car while we get search warrants and all of that. So we rely on the tow companies, which are out of Camdenton, to secure that vehicle for us. And
Then you get
it's
into
difficult.
a gray area of evidence and control of that evidence. If we have a secure Sally Port, he can put it in and it's gonna be video monitored. You can secure the vehicle in there. Everything's locked down and everything's video monitored. So your control of custody of the evidence is
Makes sense.
better.
All right, the next set of slides I'm gonna kind of walk you through here are looking at this city hall site specifically as kind of option number one. So put a site plan in here, just a couple of notes. So this comes from the Camden County GIS system. The city currently owns the lots labeled as 10 and 11. The city hall itself is kind of clouded in the red area. But total area of 10 and 11 are about 0.6 acres. So coming into this, we knew, that's not enough area to work with to accommodate the facility. So we started talking about what are some of your constraints for potentially expanding in this location. So we pointed out the MoDOT right away to the front of the site, and then you can see in the blue dashed lines, there are also overhead power lines that run really along the property boundary adjacent to that right of way. There is on location number 9, the tower that's existing out there. So it's been noted that we need to maintain access to that, as well as the tower that's located on 10 is the city's property. And then I just called out on here because it becomes part of the bigger discussion on the second site was, some of the topography. So the total lines that come out of GIS are on 20-foot increments. You can see here 940 runs really through the middle of the site, and we start to drop off kind of once we get to the back. But in general, it's a relatively flat site. The next slide just shows some of the existing photos. So again, you're familiar with this gravel drive lane to the existing city hall. There is some police vehicle parking to the back of the building. the towers that I mentioned are shown there. So again, you're all familiar with where we are here today. So I'm gonna jump ahead to the proposed site plan. So this will be the same in either option that you're gonna look at, but the 8,000 square foot city hall and police facility is the orange box. And then didn't touch on it during the program discussion, but we also had a lengthy discussion about, okay, now if you have this facility, how many parking spaces do you need to be able to accommodate, any of the functions that will go on in that space? So right now, what we plan for is approximately 30 parking spaces. That's the box that is shown in green. So this is just one option. Obviously, this could be, reconfigured and shown in many ways, but the goal was really to say, does it fit or not fit on this site? Again, we kept those constraints that we had to the front with the MoDOT right away, the overhead power lines. Obviously, anything we do to revise those existing constraints would be costly. We talked about everyone loves the trees out here. We wanted to try to stay out of them. Maybe difficult to do, but something that could be considered. So what we did here was try to outline some of the pros and cons for each of these site locations. So in terms of pros, the utilities are available and can be connected to on this site. We did talk about the potential for a future public works yard, so equipment storage, that type of thing. What I've shown here in this red box is really, there is a portion of this site to the back that could be useful, just depending on the future needs. So you could consider, a pre-engineered metal building or something that would be a future phase to the project if you so choose. We talked about topography. It's generally flat. And again, maybe the parking lot can be reconfigured or reduced with discussions of potential overflow at the fire department, if that would be something that they'd be willing to consider.
On that map, Steve had the orange and green boxes.
Green.
Okay, we don't have that one, do we?
No.
Thank you.
No, well, and you say on here acquire 0.6 acres. Which part of this is the 0.6?
Yeah, so there's a red box kind of drawn.
Yeah.
Oh, I got you,
Yep,
around
so,
here.
yep, so that I'm
We would
labeling
have to
as,
purchase
yes,
all of
the
it.
potential property
Who
acquisition.
currently owns that?
Okay,
Yeah,
Williams. What's happening?
and on the orange box, which is the 8,000 square foot, obviously you're talking about a 2-story building.
That's a 1-story building.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, it is a 1-story building. Obviously, it could be a smaller footprint if it's 2 stories. We have to go back and review what that does to the square footage. When you have a 2-story building, now you have restrooms on both floors, you have hallways on both floors, stairwells, elevators. So to get the same square footage, you almost have to increase the size of your building, and then those things become costly as well. So yes, I should have done that. That's a good question. It is 1-story, no basement.
Okay.
Yeah, and you touched on it. So in the cons list, this site would require property acquisition. I don't think it makes sense or fits to try to squeeze it in the lots that the city already owns. Another note, if you were to try to work with this site, it would likely require phased construction. So we know you need to maintain operations here while the facility is being built, so we could build out front, but then you'd likely need to come back, demo this building, finish up parking. So it gets a little bit more complicated from a logistics standpoint. And in the construction world, time is money. So in the cost, we've factored in the phased construction, accounting for a longer kind of duration of schedule to complete that here. So. All right, any other questions on this site? If not, I'm gonna jump to the second option. Okay. All right, so site option number 2, we've been referring to as the Oak Star Bank location. So this is property that the city does not own as well, but sounds like it is potentially available for sale. Again, the GIS map shows you the full parcel that's owned by the Oak Star Bank. What's interesting on this one is you can see in the faint blue lines, it looks like there are some lots or subdivisions within this total 8.4 acres. The 2 red A's or there's 3 red A's. One is obviously the bank, the other 2 A's are previous existing structures, so those still show up in the map. And actually looked, when you view the various aerials, to have been demolished somewhere between 2010 and 2016. So that's what those 2 A's are. So obviously there's been structures on this site before. You can see here too the notes about the topography. So when the lines are closer together, it means things are a lot steeper. So in this case, again, these are 20-foot increments. So we do have kind of a significant drop off of the site, really in kind of all directions. We're at a little bit of a high point here at the site. One note I added on this too, you can see kind of the yellow outlines, looks like it could have been a road at one point. This is separate from the 8.4 acres. I could not get good information on if that's a MoDOT easement or who potentially owns the rights to that land, but I'm assuming because of this subdivision within the site that there was some sort of easement or access that was given to those other former structures. Alright, so hard to show in the photos, but the next slide does give some photos of what's existing there on the site. Like I said, it is steep, rocky topography. The site slopes off dramatically on the backside of the bank. There is an existing small garage on the site, as well as like a well house or a pump house that must have a water service that feeds some irrigation to the bank. And then the picture in the bottom right shows some old foundations and slab for one of the structures that has been removed. Interestingly enough, it looks like 9x9 asbestos tile still sitting there in the sun. So just another question mark and some additional due diligence to be done for that specifically. The next slide, again, like I mentioned, things are consistent here. So the orange block is the proposed facility, shown again at single story, no basement, 8,000 square feet. With the parking falling behind that. So I had kind of drawn up an alternate option to this, and Steve gave me some feedback. So I think the preference was to keep the building facing Highway 5 for good highway visibility. So we reoriented and kind of showed that configuration. The dashed blue line in this case is really trying to indicate some new topography. So in bouncing this off a civil engineer, we think in order to make, this work, the site's gonna need to be cut down 4 to 5 feet and kind of spread out to create the space that you need for the site. The question then becomes, what are gonna be your requirements for retaining walls and guardrails or things like that? I know this is common practice down here to kind of squeeze these things in. But being a public facility, there are safety considerations and things like that will come into play. So.
The green is the parking?
The green is the
And you're
parking,
gonna, and you're
yes.
looking at using the current ingress and egress lines.
Yes,
feed that.
that's what this would show, would be coming in off that same access that's there today.
Let me just make a quick comment. The preliminary review of this would indicate that that's an old subdivision that was platted. And we believe that, if we were to acquire the property, that we could essentially just wipe that out. Haven't verified that, through the legal review, but it's the way it goes.
Did you even consider the way the land is flat at the top and then drops? Was there any consideration of having a building that did have the drop in it? Like a parking garage down below where you would drive around to?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about, kind of a 2-story building that could operate kind of city hall function on the top, police on the bottom. But again, we touched on kind of the shared spaces and the importance of the secure circulation. So we kind of said, that's not ideal given, it is a relatively small facility with some of those functions. It seemed to make more sense to keep it single story. And then the second piece of that, like I said earlier, is really the cost. So by code, you'd be required to have restrooms on each floor, you'd have stairwells for circulation, would probably be required to have an elevator based on the code that you're currently operating under. So again, doable, it's just trying to keep the cost in consideration.
So you're talking about shading off that top part?
Yes, so you would come in off the drive access that's there and you'd have almost a drop into your site. So we cut off the top and kind of push it out, so you'd have a nice kind of flatter area,
Got it.
that we're showing. Yeah,
And the way you've got the parking garage in the building on this lot, you're overextending the 8 acres that was in the original.
so we're
No.
staying within the 8. The red
You
line
are.
again is what I'm showing kind of as the project boundary. Obviously your construction is up here on the top, but like I said, with the cut and fill and trying to
Mhm.
push the site out, the red line was my best guess at what you would need, from the property standpoint, but no, it stays within the 8 acres
Okay.
of the site, so. And I tried to print this out in larger scale, again, there's some more copies of it in the back, it's a little bit bigger, but it was grainy trying to work off of aerial images that I was able to get to, so.
And I know that on one of your cons, it says steep topography, premium for site development.
Yep.
This is everywhere here, so it's
Yeah.
not gonna come in,
I know.
it's not gonna surprise anyone
Yes,
that
exactly.
we need
Yes.
a lot of work done there.
You know,
So I mean, did you consider that in the cost, that maybe your cost might be higher than what we might be able to find a local?
Yes, yeah, and Steve and I talked about that a little bit too. What we don't wanna do is, cut the dollars so short that you actually go to build this thing and you're like, wait, you told me it was gonna be,
Right.
this, and now we can't do it. So
Okay.
we tried to stay conservative, we tried to stay realistic, I've heard, we want this facility to be around for 40 years. Well, if that's the case, then we don't wanna build you something cheap that you're gonna have to maintain and repair
Right.
and, replace on a sooner timescale. So I think this is worst case, again, it's conceptual, we don't have a survey, we don't have geotechnical information, so we had to make some assumptions,
Right.
to kind of give you a best guess of what this could potentially be in terms of cost.
And when you're saying does not accommodate public works, you're considering that if we take this spot, we're probably gonna keep this for public
Yes,
works.
yes, the public works would be.
I was gonna say, Chairman, that Whole Summit built, kind of facility you're talking about, a split level with police downstairs and city hall upstairs. Lasted about 10 years and it wasn't a facility that was workable. They ended up abandoning it and wrote city hall and police moved out.
Okay. And there is, what kind of, just out of curiosity, the exterior, is this a metal building or is it a brick and mortar?
So we talked about that too, kind of during the vision of the project. What I heard is that it does not want to be traditional brick, that it does want to be more modern, not necessarily modern in, a sense that it's gonna be out of place in a few years, but definitely forward thinking. So we did talk about, metal panels, glass, maybe some stone, those being the primary materials, but, from a cost standpoint, we did not assume a brick facade.
Okay.
Okay, so flipping ahead, the next slides are gonna start getting us into the cost estimate. So one thing I wanna point out before we dive into this is we don't just look at the construction cost of the building, because we know there are other expenses that you would come up against when you're trying to build this facility. So what you'll see here on all of these tables are a subtotal of construction with all of the markups that we would include, things like supervision and, oversight, insurance, contractor's profit, bonds, which, would be required in this case. We factor in design contingency. Again, it's a conceptual level, estimate at this point. And to be honest, we always carry contingency in our estimates. That way we're not coming back and saying, oops, we didn't think of this, or oops, this is a surprise. We want to try to buffer those things along the way. And then there's a column in for soft costs. So when we total these things up, we call it a total program budget. So the soft costs in this case, we've shown at 20%. And what this covers are things like your survey, your geotechnical investigation, any furniture, fixtures, equipment, maybe you have some IT related costs, your design fees to hire, architects, engineers to come in for this. So that 20% is intended to cover kind of all of those other contracts that you would hold outside of the construction costs. So when you see these numbers, the totals that we're looking at are the total program, not just the construction number. So I'll point that out going in. And then what you see here on this first slide is really just looking at the estimate for the building itself. So when we put the numbers together for this, we looked at what does it take to build the facility, kind of independent of the two site options. So that's what you see here, the 8,000 square foot building, total with the markups, the contingency, the soft cost that I mentioned. The facility only cost is just under that $3.8 million mark for the 8,000 square feet. So knowing that there may be some sticker shock and thinking, hey, this is more than we can afford, we started a conversation or, what are things that we could do to reduce the cost without impacting, functionality or the things that we talked about. So we said, if you remember, the program number was about 7,700 square feet. So can we squeeze a little bit out of this and get down to a 7,500 square foot building? Sure, we just need to have, some discussions on where do we think we can lose those spaces. Maybe when this advances into design, the circulation factor becomes more efficient, but at either rate, what if we start looking at kind of squeezing this down? So some potential savings there. Again, like I mentioned, we're assuming this is a steel frame building. We want it to be here and last for a long time, but if you want to consider kind of alternate construction methods, more like commercial, or even reducing to a wood frame building with asphalt shingles, getting more residential style, there are some ways that costs could be saved there. One that I didn't put on here, but Steve and I have talked about is, some of these spaces in the building are for future growth. Obviously, you don't have all of these staff and the need here today, so maybe when you get to the design portion of this, you could start saying, okay, we need 4,000 square feet today, but in the future, we'll need the other half, so you could look at white boxing or building the kind of the core and shell of the building, but maybe not fitting out all of the interiors from day one. And then as you grow, you could come back potentially with the second project and say, okay, now we need this space, let's go ahead and build out the rest. So things like that could be part of the discussion on how you kind of tick the dollars down from where we're at today.
If you did that in two phases, do you have an estimate of how much extra it costs to, say, 5 years from now you expand? It would be 20%?
I'd have to go look. I mean, as you know, escalation and
Sure,
inflation
I
has
know.
been all over the place the last couple of years. So we could put some numbers to that if we said we want to carve out,
Don't do anything.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, I know it costs a lot percentage more, but I don't know what, I don't want to double. If you can build it now for $3.8 million, but if you could put it up for $2 million and add another $2 million later, maybe that'd be better. So we're still little, we're not very big.
Sure.
And when I've already looked at the second page, which is where you put the parking. So this 3.7 does not include the concrete.
Correct. Does not include, your paid parking. So it is, like I said, it is just the building. And then on the next slide, are the site costs. So then we started looking at, okay, if we place it at either location, what are the costs associated specifically with the site? So we know, we looked at distance to connect to your utilities. So you'll see, we've taken that into consideration. The parking lot size itself is the same between the two options. It's just, the orientation. So based on what we're looking at, and primarily because of the things like the rock and cutting and filling the site, unknown needs on retaining walls, that type of thing, we are estimating at this time potentially up to a $500,000 premium to build at the Oak Stark site versus here at the City Hall site. So
But when you say that, you're not including the 0.6 acres we have to purchase.
That's correct,
Which
yes.
could possibly be $1 million.
sure, yep, I think those are an unknown to us at this time, so rather than speculate and
Currently,
assume
it's
something,
$500,000.
Yeah, so I mean, those two differences might not be that different. Okay,
Just to kind of underscore a comment she made earlier. We hired them to do a certain job and basically give us what I kind of call the worst case scenario, right? And Katie and I had these conversations over the last few weeks. Very reasonably, we think we can reduce costs in a lot of areas. The site as well, right? These are some big numbers to deal with for just the site costs. I think they're very valid numbers right now. However, I do think if we move forward, we can very reasonably bring those back.
I agree.
So, you know, again, I think of what she's presenting now as kind of a worst case scenario.
Just like I said, when you start talking to local people around here and getting quotes on things like shaving down that mountainside, it could end up being a lot less from people who do it all the time.
And there's also, I know,
Right now, site work
east.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
a multitude of contractors that come into this area, a multitude.
There's a 10-acre piece down at 536 behind those little motel things. And it's cupped instead of a hill rising. It's kind of cupped. It would be a lot less fill and cut than the Oak Star. But it's 300,000, but the Oak Star is almost free. But the cut and fill is killing me.
So the final page is,
Yeah, so the next page of the total project cost estimate, it just totals up the building plus each of the sites. So you can see here somewhere in the range of 4.4 to 4 million, depending on which site you're selecting as that total program cost. Again, we'll just carry those alternates forward, and can certainly consider other ways to reduce the cost. But I talked to Steve a little bit too. You know, we do these studies quite often, and there's kind of two different approaches. One, we start from the ground and we build things up, which is what we did in this case. We talked about what do you need to get to a building and then do the cost. We've done these where we start with the budget and then say, okay, what can you get for the money you have? So there are certainly two approaches to this, but I think we were in a situation where, like I said, we wanted to identify a facility that would meet the long-term needs. Steve had given me some budget numbers, and we got into this pretty early and said, okay, based on what we're hearing as needs and we're being told on budget, we know there's maybe a disconnect. So like I said, certainly can look at this from both angles.
so I see you have a schedule here, potential schedule. You think that we would already be securing financing by the end of 24?
No, I think more the goal of this would just be to kind of give you a high level kind of milestone. So not assuming, you're moving forward with anything, more what I wanted to show is, okay, if you're in a position where this is moving forward, look at this in terms of big blocks of time. So the design phase of the project, we're showing at about, 12 months, and then construction, again, another 10 to 12 months. So the goal of this slide is just to say, if you say go today, it's not like you have a new building, up by next year.
Right.
It's kind of the start of a multi-year process to get you to that point, so.
What services do you offer beyond what you've already done?
Sure, absolutely. So we could really continue on, from this point. So most of our clients, like I mentioned, are municipal or K through 12. They don't have in-house staff that manage this type of, project on a day-to-day basis. So what we can do is really come in from day one. We can help you solicit requests for qualifications for design teams. We're well versed in following Missouri state statutes for procurement. Professional services, we can onboard, the surveyor, all of those contracts that I mentioned in the total program, we can help you solicit and contract with those services. So we do contract negotiations, we do budget management, and I think what we offer is really trying to, establish the goals, establish the budget, establish the timeline, and then we're gonna get you through that process. So when we go into projects, we don't say, oh, okay, it's $4 million and then get you through design and suddenly it's 5. We hold the design teams accountable to managing to that budget. We do in-house estimating, so you can see our conceptual estimate is in the back of the book here. But when we get to actual plans on paper, we'll do the quantity takeoffs. We'll consult with your subcontractor market. We'll get that input and really refine that estimate as we move through design. So really kind of full-scale pre-construction services. Same on the backside with construction. So we can put together the bid package to solicit your general contractor. With that, we have a pretty robust front-end package, we call it, so we don't just put out a set of plans and specs and say, give us a number. You know, we like to put things in there, for maybe there's site logistics requirements where they need fencing up, or, you know, you want full-time supervision, like we'll capture all of those other kind of needs that don't show up in the plans, to make sure the bidders are all kind of apples to apples when they're coming back to you with their pricing. We can offer full-scale construction services where we do site inspections, we monitor ongoing construction progress with weekly, you know, monthly reports. I mentioned we continue that cost monitoring, you know, throughout the construction phase. You know, mentioned FF&E, if you have furniture and equipment, you know, IT coordination, any of those services we can really offer. You can scale it up or scale it down based on needs, so.
Well, I think probably because you've given us a lot of information, we're probably gonna end up having to have some kind of a working session just to discuss what we've seen so far and what we think and all that. Steve, any thoughts on that? I mean,
Sure. I mean, just a couple things. I thought it was important for us to understand what our space needs are, right? And so she met with us and chief and staff in here. And, you know, she initially gave us a program and we did reduce it, frankly, some. Not to single out the Sally Port. In my opinion, though, Sally Port is a must-have, okay? There's certain things that we really feel is very important. There's other things that we could potentially reduce. The meeting space actually was reduced. The initial thought was, I forget what exactly it was, it was size for maybe 25 people. We really felt like, especially in this day and age with, you know, ability to live stream meetings and so forth, we thought we could reasonably scale that back. That conference room, however, on the other hand, we felt is pretty important. You know, right now, there's no place, obviously, within the existing facility to have any type of conference. It's just
Private.
really lacking, you know, and then I forget who, I think it was Mr. Carter who made the point about training for the police department, right? There's just no place to have it. So, in any case, we put all that together and we got to just a little shy of 8,000 square feet. Could it be reduced some? Yes, it could be. We also talked about the ability or the idea of maybe building, you know, to a certain point now and then building out later when the need arises. But I feel pretty strong about that number. I think it's pretty reasonable. I think the board, the community ought to know, like, if we're gonna go forward with a new building, it needs to be about this size. Then it comes a question, you know, what's it gonna cost? And here is, you know, as usual, is really where the rubber hits the road. And, you know, the $5 million figure, frankly, is just, in my opinion, beyond this. We can't do it. You know, I mean, there's always a way, but it would require some type of tax increase of some significance, and I just don't think we're there. At the other hand, you know, I think we're at a point where we really need to do something. We have to have some plan moving forward. We're out of space here. And by that, I'm not just talking about the city hall building. I'm talking about the yard, right? Our police fleet is here. Our public works fleet is here. I mean, there's no place to park right now, hardly even for customers. And so we're out of space. We got to have some plan going forward. And I think, just as you say, it's going to probably take a little bit of, you know, take the report now and maybe, you know, think about it and come at it, you know, next meeting. I would never want to get in a hurry. But yeah, I think that's where we're at least now. I will say, last thing here, Oak Star has, I think even before I came here, it's been close to a year now, Oak Star had offered the property to the city even previous to that. They do want an answer, and, you know, I think it's only fair to them to give them an answer sooner than later. When it comes to acquiring that property, that alone, even if the city didn't want to pursue it, that would be something that would take a little bit of time too. You know, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but we'd almost certainly have to have an environmental, phase one environmental survey done. And there's things I know that they would want in the contract. They had talked, they maintain that well right now for irrigation purposes, and so how that might impact the construction on it. There's just a lot to maybe hash out even within that contract, if we want to pursue it.
They haven't offered a contract, have they?
No, it's,
Because they're gonna have stipulations in there that we can't buy it and then sell it to somebody else probably, right?
sure, I would expect that, yes.
I think that-
Are you looking
Well,
at bond anything?
A little bit about financing. So USDA, of course, financed this bill. I had preliminary conversations with them over this project, and they, we are certainly eligible. I think, you know, there's no guarantees, but I do think that we'd be a very good candidate for their program. They offer 35-year terms, which is, you know, is a long-term, without any prepayment penalty. So it would be able to allow the city to spread that cost over the long term. Right now, their interest rate is 4%. And this, day and age, 4% is pretty good. It wasn't very good just 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, interest rates. So, you know, that's still, I mean, there's a pretty good finance charge associated with that. As far as the question for the city attorney bonding, any type of bonding would have to go to the voters. And so, and by that, of course, you know, we're talking about some type of tax that would help support it. When you gets into some specifics, I don't know if tonight's the night for it. Just to be real clear on the tax piece, one thing I'd let the board know is, you know, our assessed valuation last year, the total city assessed valuation was 25 million. And so 10 cents, a 10-cent tax levy on $25 million is $25,000, right? It's just not a big sum of money. And so I've always been, you know, I don't mind saying, I would, of course, want to ask the voters for a tax increase. And one of the downsides is it's just because there's such limited assessed valuation, you know, you wouldn't get a big return on it either. So it's kind of an unknown as far as how to fund it. When you get, say, anywhere from 3 million on up, it's tough. I mean, I don't have a good answer for you tonight, I need to say.
well,
This all being said, this whole program, there isn't anything encompassing like our public works equipment, trucks, so on and so forth, correct?
Correct, yes.
So that's something that has to be addressed.
well, that's when you look at the two concepts, either here or at the other place. If we did it here, we'd have to purchase part of the land here, which we know is gonna be quite
I
expensive.
understand.
If we do it over there, this
Becomes
becomes
available.
public works. And we do still have that land over by the other water tower.
But we need some type of facility. We can't leave
Right.
that outside.
Do we have any limitations on what we do with this ground? Like if down the road, if we were in a position where we could just collapse all this and build one metal building and put them in a facility here that actually housed them?
So
I think
there's,
so.
I don't think there's
Not to
anything
my
in the contract that said we
And the
own.
reason I asked that is all the conversations we had over that cell tower.
Right.
So I'm just,
Well, and we do have an easement on the road, but
Right.
we don't own the road.
right,
But would there be a stipulation in the USDA against how they structure?
I don't think so. When I discussed that with the USDA rep, yeah, I mean, she felt like really it was two different deals. Right? So, yeah, I don't think they would be protected.
I think for the time being, and we really are glad we did this because it does give us a lot to go on as far as the future planning. I mean, at least we have an idea of what we're looking at. Probably the next steps might be some kind of a working session just to throw ideas around.
Right.
Agreed?
Great.
Could we present this to, or should we present it to Oak Star, whoever may be involved with, that could put stipulations that could change what we have proposed? So if we know they're gonna say, hey, that well has to stay, or anything out of the ordinary. Is there harm in doing that sooner versus later before we start signing anything and agreeing to buy property?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the board wants to take the next step with Star property, I think it would, be a conversation with them over, what our expectation is, what theirs is. The city attorney can tell us whether that's probably a closed session type of discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you go at it a variety of ways. I mean, when it comes to real estate, I've often been advised, just put it in writing and make an offer and go from there, right? Make it simple. That could be a way to do it. Let them respond with a counter and have a discussion that way. Maybe we have the type of discussion that I had suggested earlier, maybe a starting point.
Well, okay, if no one has any more questions for
I
Katie.
have one question. Your services, you obviously proposed something to us and we accepted it and you built this as a beautiful package. How far, if I found another piece of ground and I brought it to us and we approved it have you come back, do we have additional expenses to have you recreate?
Yeah, I think if we're gonna look at a third site, there would be some additional costs. I think the bulk of the effort is kind of done here, so it certainly, would be a reduced value of the initial task order, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
How much money we talking about?
I'd have to get with my office on that. I don't handle that part, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We're ready to move on? You gonna stay for the rest of the
I think
meeting
I'm
or are
gonna
you
head
gonna
home.
head home?
So, yes.
Thank you for
Thanks for coming.
everything.
Been down here
It's really a
since
good
Tuesday.
presentation.
Yes.
Where's home, St. Louis?
Washington area. So.
Thank you.
Well, then, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, where are we? Chairman. Okay. Seems like we've already had the meeting, but anyway. Greetings, residents, guests, staff, and board of trustees. Tonight, we will begin discussing our need for expansion of our city hall building, police department, and public works department. You may have noticed the parking is becoming a real puzzle each day as we expand services to the community and look to invite more businesses into Sunrise Beach. We have to start looking at more space. We welcome Katie, who did give us a great overview, so we have some work to do on that. We're also going to talk tonight about a beautification ordinance. This specifies that the maintenance responsibilities of a homeowner as far as caring for the right-of-way in front of their properties. We have more annexations coming to our doorsteps, and there will be more on that later too. Our newsletter went out last week. We hope this communication piece is well received by everyone to show that we are accomplishing in their behalf for the improvements of the village. We had nothing but good comments about the newsletter, so really happy about the newsletter.
Should we have received that yet?
You should have, you did not? Oh, I received mine the day after it was mailed. That's interesting.
Check his address and see if we're
Yeah.
billing him for.
Where do you live? There is one request I have for the public. We would love to have any walking trails, pickleball courts, dog walking area, If you have land that might be used for community use such as this, think about donating it to Sunrise Beach. If it's possible, we would love to put that land to use. As always, call myself or any board member if you have questions or comments. And visitors' comments. You got your newsletter now. Okay, we'll move right along to the ordinances and resolutions. The bill number 2024-17. It doesn't say, but this will be a first reading.
Yes. So bill number 2024-17, an ordinance of the Village of Sunrise Beach for improving and beautifying the city by requiring property owners to maintain the right-of-way abutting their properties. First reading.
Make a motion to accept first reading.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Do we need a roll call on that or?
Nope, there's one more second one.
Okay. Old business. Do we have any old business?
I don't think so.
Okay. And your report, Steve?
Yeah, just a quick budget report. I handed out the sales tax tables and use tax. I'm always concerned about the budget, as you know, and generally speaking, it's good news. Our sales tax continues to be pretty strong, actually very strong. The June figures came in today. The June receipts were 48,116. You can see that is more than, or just a little, basically 10,000 more than the same period last year and the same period of May 2022. Yes, and sorry, these numbers are kind of small. For the year, the 6-month period, we have received $221,470, and this is our general fund 1 cent sales tax. We also have the other half-cent sales taxes, of course. When you compare the 6-month period, January through June of this year, I know I don't have this on the sheet, but that same period last year was about 167,000. So we're tracking well over the 2023 numbers. My guess, and it's just a guess, last year, in calendar year, we did 542,000 in 1 cent sales tax. Right now, again, we're tracking well above that. I do think it's very reasonable for us to hit, say, 600, which would be another very year of impressive growth. On the downside, the use tax figures are actually a little bit less. At least through the 6 months, January through June. Use tax comes from a variety of sources. A lot of it is from Amazon and your mail order, internet sales, so to speak. There are other components to the use tax. Right now, we are actually tracking a little bit less than last year. I do think last year there were a few purchases that were, you may consider one-time purchases that were a little bit unusual. If you look at the 2022 use tax figures, 141,000 total, and then the year prior, 120. I think those might be a little more representative or more what you might expect. So, you know, if you think about what we've done so far this year, close to 80,000. When you compare it to 2022, 21, I think we're going to be over that. And just in general, I noted this in my report, but our overall fund balances are good. Our capital improvement sales taxes, we have spent it down a little bit from the June 30 numbers with some of the checks that went out, but we're in good shape there. Transportation the same way. So generally speaking, our funds really look pretty strong at the moment. Water and sewer is always our concern. As you all know, we supplement water and sewer capital improvement sales tax, and we did do some recent transfers to pay some of our debt. That's how the budget is built, and we don't really do any of those transfers unless we feel they're absolutely necessary. And our water and sewer fund was getting to the point where we felt like we had to make some of those transfers. It was about 32,000, and we paid two of the quarterly payments, the March and June payments on some of the water and sewer debt. So we kind of supplemented the water and sewer fund with the common room sales tax. It was really the only transfer we made this
Correct.
so far this fiscal year. We will do it again. I'm sure we will probably later in the year, maybe December. But any questions on budget? Other than that, really nothing to report.
I noticed on here you had for municipal building next steps, city attorney can advise us. Do we need to have a closed session to discuss whether we want to offer Oak Star a contract?
That would be closed.
Okay.
The general discussions like what we're having now would be open. But if you're talking about a specific piece of property, yes, that would be closed.
Okay.
It would be an option for them to do it tonight, correct?
If you got it on the agenda.
It was not posted on the agenda. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. So next steps, again, I guess we'll just plan some sort of a working session to discuss further if we should look at one of these properties and
And if
decide.
you want to, you could then have a close at the end of that work session to make it specific.
Okay. Chief, do you have anything to add to your report?
Nothing to add, other than there was a change in the report. The conditional offer that was made has been rescinded due to unforeseen circumstances.
So we're still in the look,
We're looking for one.
officer number 4. Okay. Finance, list of bills.
Make a motion that we pay our bills.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Did anyone, I should have asked this before we had the first reading, but you did look at the ordinance, the beautification, and you understand what we're doing with that?
I would just throw in, it's very typical.
Yeah.
Most cities have something like that.
Well, I had asked Steve, is that in addition to the nuisance, the 2 that we just
Yeah.
passed? Kind of. It is.
We've done several of.
Well, we've been getting a lot of calls, people thinking that we need to cut their trees down, so this is something good for us to have. Anything else?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.